Hello, my name is Markou, and this is a pilot podcast with the actor Ed Stoppard. It was recorded on Saturday, the 16th of May, 2020, in the middle of a lockdown. Well, I met Victoria in 1990, at the end of 1993.
Over 26 years.
Yeah, it's a long time to be with one person. I mean, in fairness, but we've been 4 or 5 different people in that time, and therefore I feel I've dated at least 4 or 5 different women throughout that time.
As I've said before in previous incarnations of this fledgling podcast, at the very least, I'm hoping that we'll get our wives to listen to it. I'm hoping for a minimum 2 listeners.
What do you think about B-sides as an idea? Should I describe again what B-sides is?
Sure.
But effectively, B-sides, the idea of B-sides is that you and me, in our own idiosyncratic way, interview someone potentially of note who has an interesting B-side. I could just test it with you and talking about you're an actor, but you also have a passion for archery. That's kind of like your B-side. It's your passion. It's something that people might not know about you. And you can talk about archery at length, and you can bring in all the stories about archery and how you got into it and how you discovered it and the kind of alleyways and avenues that you've gone down in your world of archery. That could be a model for future interviews. And then we could bring it into the public domain and get emails from people saying, this is my B-side, and they could be read out in the show. What do you think, Ed?
I'm thinking that if we manage to get Timothy Chalamet, who looks like your youngest son, Costi, onto our podcast, and Timothy Chalamet revealed that in his spare time, he is a freelance bounty hunter, that would be an intriguing podcast.
I think that we could get something interesting out of you talking about archery, because it's all about the questions we ask and where they lead on to. I mean, I'll ask you, Ed.
Go on.
Ed, how the hell did you get into archery?
How do I... I'll tell you how I got into it. I was shooting a TV show in the Czech Republic that was set in 14th century France. And on certain days, like shooting scenes, big exterior scenes in forests with like the court and stuff. I was the king of France. The set design guys, they would from time to time put out like archery targets and have a few like bows and arrows lying about as just sort of to make it look medieval and whatnot. And one of these days I was like, I love a bit of archery. So between shots, I would like run off over to where the archery stuff was and fire some arrows at some targets. So that was quite fun. And then a few days later, I went onto one of the sets to do like a stunt rehearsal, like a fight rehearsal. And I was at like 15 minutes late, whatever. And Tom Cullen, who was the lead guy and who was the guy I was supposed to be fighting, he and the stunt guys had been killing time before I arrived by trying to shoot this water bottle with the same kind of sort of medieval type bows that just also happened to be lying around on this backlot on the set. And I was like, let me have a go. And the first arrow I fired went through the geometric center of the bottle. They'd been trying
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be. They've been trying for 15 minutes to like hit this bottle. And they couldn't even hit it. And the first arrow I shot literally went straight through the geometric center. I mean, it was sort of hilarious, but it was like a 500 ml water bottle. I mean, even at 8, it's not a particularly big target, even from 8 yards. Anyway, so they were all gobsmacked, as was I. And I basically said to Tom, I bet there's like an archery club in Prague. And I duly found one. And went along. And this lovely, nice Czech woman whose father ran the club, and she was like a very good archer. She kind of gave me a few pointers, and I went.
Stop. Can I ask a question? How did you go from hitting that bottle in the geometric center to ending up at an archery club in Prague? I mean, that's a big step.
Well,
what did you do?
I Googled it. So, I mean, to be frank, I Googled it. I mean, I said to Tom, like Tom said, let's do more archery. And I went, yeah, I bet there's a club. I'll Google it. And there was one. And I think I must have phoned them maybe and spoke to this nice girl. And she said, yeah, come along on Wednesdays. It's like £5 for an hour. And because it was in the winter, it was like in a gymnasium in this kind of quite cool building on this island in the river in Prague. And it was like just me and her, I think. I don't know, shot a few dozen arrows from quite close range.
Is there jargon? Is there jargon associated it? Do you shoot wood? What's the thing? Or do you shoot arrows?
I think you're thinking of pornography, Marcus. I think shoot wood is a term from adult entertainment.
What do you call the arrows then? What's the kind of jargon? The jargon?
I see. Yeah. Those are called arrows. They're called arrows. What do you mean? They're called arrows.
But you know when people go shooting, they say squeeze off a few rounds.
I see. Squeeze off a few rounds.
So when you go. When you do that, like I'm just dropping by the Prague Arrow Club.
No, you shoot an arrow.
Oh, there's no jargon.
I mean, to be honest, like if I maybe there is, and I just don't know. But I've never heard anyone tell me to like squeeze off some wood, for example. Anyway, so I did this stuff in Prague and just kind of loved it and got quite obsessive, and then I came back home at the end of that job, which would have been Christmas 2018, and bought myself a kind of basic bow and stuff for
how
Christmas.
much? Let's get into costs.
Oh,
what does yours?
It was like £120 for the bow, arrow, string, like the
whole thing,
the whole shebang to get you going. And then I bought like a basic straw target, and that was, I can't remember, for £40 or something. I can't remember. And
did that also include the guard that goes on your arm to stop the string?
Yeah, that's right. The arm guard. That's right. All that.
So for any listeners out there who might be interested in archery, you're looking to get into it.
Yeah.
£200 and you're in.
Well, you also need a garden, or like you just go to your local archery club and join. And you have to do like a 5-week course. 1 second, sorry. Guys, I'm actually kind of doing a thing here. So if you keep that.
It's a public area.
Oy vey. Okay, but if you wouldn't mind.
It's extremely loud. We're not going to be here for 15 minutes chattering away. We're going to be here for 2 whilst we try and figure this out. I think you've also chosen the weirdest place to do it.
Ed has 3 doors.
I'm doing it where I want.
Actually, if you hadn't talked to us, we would have gone a lot quicker.
I just want to interject here. This is an interjection. The power of editing is that I'm able to do this after the podcast. Just want to point out that is Ed's 3 daughters. And he just made the big mistake of taking all 3 on at the same time. Good luck, Ed. Good luck.
Right. Okay. Fine. No, you're right. You're right. I'm completely wrong. No, you're right. Okay. Thanks. Thank you very much. Okay.
On a serious note, how many hours have you spent shooting arrows now? I mean, what's your kind of...
I'm genuinely embarrassed to say.
How long ago did you start? When was this moment, this kind of...
Well, the beginning of 2019, basically.
So it's been really 18 months. I mean, it's become quite a thing for you. It's become quite meditative. It's become part of your life. It's become something you go to quite a lot.
Well, I actually can't not shoot arrows every day in my garden. I mean, obviously it's COVID,
Great.
So we're in lockdown. But I think I've damaged my back and shoulder muscles
from doing it so much.
I think I have kind of horribly overdeveloped certain of my muscles because I've just been relentlessly firing arrows for
Ed.
Certainly for the last, how long's COVID been? 2 months.
How many hours a day have you been averaging in the last 18 months? It's got to be 2 or 3.
We should really talk how many arrows a day because my oldest brother, he recently got into archery about a year before me, just by pure chance. And we were talking about this the other day. And the time it takes him to fire 1 arrow, I would probably fire 3 arrows, right? So his process is much slower than mine. I would say in a given day, I probably shoot 100 arrows, right?
And can I just briefly interject, very briefly? When we went on holiday together at New Year's, you
Yes.
brought an arrow set and a target,
Yeah.
and you started to get me addicted to it. Do you
Right.
remember?
I do.
And you left me outside, and I was there for a good hour or so.
Yeah.
There is something I don't think we've managed to convey to the listeners just how satisfying letting an arrow off is and hitting that, getting that thud noise. Because you're saying you're shooting 100 arrows a day. I know why. It's like you're chasing the next thud moment, aren't you? And it's addictive.
Yeah, and there's also something, I think, to just kind of be frank about it, there is a kind of slightly sort of primal caveman-y hunter-gatherer thing going on. And, we're so kind of sanitized. Our existence is so sanitized nowadays.
It feels good, doesn't
it? The most danger you or I are likely to be in on any given day is, the risk of, burning our hand on the oven as we remove our fresh sourdough that we've just baked that morning. That's the world we live in. And so I think there is a little bit of kind of transference into a sort of, a kind of harsher, more dangerous world where, we might kind of test ourselves or something. I'm reaching a bit here, but there's something about that.
I don't think we should downplay this or make light of it.
Connecting with a time when men were men, Marcus.
But it would be easy for us now to kind of make light of that, and I don't want to. I genuinely think you're onto something, because we are in this modern world. We've lost that idea of our senses and our connection to, because it feels quite a nature thing when you shoot an arrow. It feels like because you're outside. I remember when you showed me how to shoot.
Yeah.
It's the stillness. It's the stillness that precedes it. Not just the meditative quality, but your feet. It's the way your feet are planted on the ground. It's your posture. It's connecting to the ground and nature. And then you get a sense of the outside, and you can hear nature around you. And then the crisp air, and then letting one fly, and then hearing that satisfying sound, and connecting with the target, and all those things being in great synchronicity. It feels good.
Yeah. I think, I guess, no, you're right. I mean, we get so few really kind of concrete examples in life of like validation. And, if you fire an arrow at a target and you hit the center of the target, that's like instant feedback. And your brain goes nuts and just starts furiously pumping endorphins. And
and did you buy? You upgraded your bow, didn't you? I think you got into the bow upgrades.
Actually, my brother gave me his old bow because he had a bow that he'd sort of grown out of in terms of the weight of it. In other words, how much power you have to put into the bow to draw it. He bought a new bow that was heavier. And so he said, look, you can have this bow because I just won't ever use it again. So I used my brother's old bow.
But there's something nice about the brothers sharing the bow. Again, going back to that idea of connecting to something that's a little bit bigger than us. I love that. I know you won't want to go into that.
Yeah.
But I love that. And
no, I love that I have got my brother's bow, totally.
And you said at the beginning of this podcast, you said, we wouldn't get 8 minutes out of you shooting bows.
Well, you're sweet. I mean, one wonders, were this actually a real podcast, how many of our original listeners would still be with us?
I don't care. I've done improv shows in front of 5 people, and they've been really worthy moments that were only witnessed by 5 people.
Yeah.
So right. I don't care. I'm not numbers driven.
Listen, in all fairness, I'm not. That was like, that was a cheap shot. I retract it.
Yeah, because those loyal listeners there will be a market for something like this. This, like, getting into someone's, like what we've discovered about your B-side, about the archery. It started off a bit flippant, but actually when you started getting into the story and we start talking about connecting to something. I find that really interesting because I think everyone's B-side is about connecting to something that might be missing in their life, whatever it is. And I think every human being has it, every one of us. And there is a pursuit of the authentic. And it's no coincidence that on Twitter, there's a couple of friends I've got that we start talking about music and vinyl and Frank Sinatra. We have Frank Sinatra Sundays and things like that. And again, it's the idea of going back to vinyl, which I know you've done as well. Yeah. And it's things like that. And I think people's B-sides are going to be, when we dig into them, are going to be that. They're going to be about connecting to something authentic. And that's worthy of exploration. I think. I could be wrong. And we may only end up with 5 listeners.
All of whom we'll be on first name terms with.
Well, we can but try.
You're right. Yeah. I agree. I'm going to listen. You know what?
We only have to do 10 of them a year, don't we? And they just become like, collector's items.
Very nice. Like the hunky dories that you gave to my daughters.
I gave 3 of them to all 3 of your daughters.
Yeah, you
didn't
gave
I?
each of my children a gold hunky dory.
Only because every time they used to come here, they would get the coloured vinyl out.
Yeah, you've got some great coloured vinyl.
Yeah, I went through a coloured vinyl stage. It was kind of teenage.
Did you buy a turntable?
Yeah, I have a turntable. Yeah, when we moved house when I moved house with Victoria, we started having kids. They never unpacked the albums, the vinyl, and then I just switched over straight to. It was the birth of MP3 and digital music and downloads and then there was the iPod, and it didn't feel like I needed to ever unpack my vinyl. But then when we moved into this house in 2012, I looked at the vinyl that was sitting in boxes, been probably sat in boxes for a decade, if not more. And I thought, let me get them out. And then at that point, I went and bought a turntable, and because it was nice just to put them out. And
this has actually just got me thinking. And you in fairness said this a few minutes ago, talking about archery, that you talked about it being a connection. And actually holding a vinyl record is a kind of intrinsic and important part of listening to and playing music on vinyl.
Yeah. Yes. And also it's putting the turntable on.
Connection. And the turntable likewise, right? Right?
Yeah, and lifting the stylus and putting the stylus on and hearing that first crackle.
Totally. And so I wonder actually if there is something a little bit sort of atavistic about us, because like in evolutionary terms, the Industrial Revolution, not even the Industrial Revolution, the second half of the 20th century, frankly, and maybe even the last 2 decades, where automation really kicked in.
Yeah.
So, and now we live in a world where you just shout Alexa across a room and stuff happens.
Yeah.
That actually we crave subconsciously. The actual doing, the kind of physical contact. I mean, part of the pleasure of archery, undoubtedly, is holding the bow, knocking the arrow. There's a nice bit of terminology for you, Marcus.
Ah, perfect. I knew I was right. There was jargon there. Knocking an arrow.
The act of like pulling your arrows out of the target. All of it. Like putting the arrows back into my quiver. The whole fucking thing. Every element is very tactile. Yeah. It's very sort of physical. It's very connecting in a sort of real sense to the objects and the exercise and the, dare I say it, the kind of craft of it and stuff. And, when we get Harrison Ford on here, as I'm sure we will, I fully expect him to wax lyrical for several minutes about the pleasures of wielding an adze.
Editor's interjection: an adze, alternative spelling adze, ADZ, is a cutting tool similar to an axe, but with the cutting edge perpendicular to the handle rather than parallel. They have been used since the Stone Ages. Adzes are used for smoothing or carving wood in hand woodworking. Harrison Ford is known to have been, and probably still is, a carpenter.
I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Is that correct? An adze. Because I feel sure that Harrison Ford owns several adzes, and he will say, I've got no interest in like phoning up like a lumber mill and asking them to like, hew some piece of wood to my design, even were it to be identical and maybe even objectively superior to whatever it is that I would produce at home with my own hands, wielding my favorite adze. And therein lies the critical element of people's B-sides.
And that's why I took up drums. Drums is probably my B-side, because for me, the very act of the act of drumming is physical.
Yeah,
and
totally.
It's connected. And
absolutely.
I had such a craving to drum.
Yeah.
So I got a kit in the basement. It's exhilarating because it's the doing.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously with drums, it's very primal. And
do you reckon a lot of male B-sides will ultimately end up, if not involving quite a kind of violent action, that there will be like the possibility of violence? You know,
it's interesting.
You could kill someone with like a carpentry chisel, like by accident. Do you know what I mean? You wouldn't even have to mean to do it. You could kill someone. Archery, obs. Drumming, you know, you're just beating the hell out of something, aren't you?
Yeah, but they're all connected to.
Yeah, go on.
It's all connected to a masculine energy, and there's nothing wrong. I wouldn't say violent.
But so well then, fine. Well, in which case, you know, we'll have to get on Angela Merkel and, you know, see if actual jiu-jitsu really is her B-side, or if it's needlepoint or something. And and there's nothing wrong if it is needlepoint.
I think that's a good place to end this podcast, Ed.
All right,
let's just end it there.
All right,
bye.
Bye, Marcus. Thanks, mate.
I thought I'd do an interjection towards the end because that really was rather too sudden to end a podcast. But certainly it's an interesting subject matter, the B-side. It's something that Ed and I have slowly come towards. This is our third or fourth podcast that we've done. The first two were just nonsense. And I do take people's point out there that all conversations have already been had. What's the point of another self-indulgent conversation? But there is something about the B-side, the exploration of someone's B-side, on what it says about them and what it says about us as a society, as a culture. So I do think there's something there worth investigating. And whether we continue this podcast or not, I don't know. I have really enjoyed doing it with Ed because we're friends and we go back since drama school, which is over 20 years. What was nice about that podcast we just did was we kind of organically stumbled on that idea of connection to something more authentic, which I think was interesting. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. It's our maiden test kind of pilot podcast. Whether it goes on, who knows? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Give us your honest feedback. We really don't want to be doing this if we're wasting everybody's time. But if you think there's something there, give us your positive feedback. Thank you. And maybe one day we'll have you talking about your B-side.